everybody, and you are here for Go Beyond, whether you know it or not. That's what we're doing. I am excited to sit in today for the famous Alyssa Robinson. And so I'm excited to be here and dig deeper into some of these questions with Pastor Daniel. How are you doing today, Daniel?
Absolutely.
You ready for this?
Glad to be with you, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. This is exciting. I feel famous. Feel like Barbara Walters or something here. That
I don't know about that.
Well, we've been talking a lot about, well, maybe not. I'm just so much younger. That's what it is. And digging into the Psalms. And so we've switched now for somebody here whose playlist used to be a mixtape. And I have loved this. The music really cool, especially for us Gen Xers. We've really enjoyed that. So we've been talking this week about the Psalms and trust. And you preached a lot on 23rd Psalm this week, and it was neat. I have the benefit of getting to hear it several times with our recording and everything, and I thought it was interesting to see this turned as a psalm for trust, because to be honest, I equate it so much with funerals and inspiration that it really had me look at it a different way. So talk to me a little, how did the 23rd Psalm become popular? How did this become the one?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that literally happened. But my assumption is this, that because it is so comforting, because it is so speaks into the human condition, that I think people over the centuries began to recognize how helpful it was. And I think that didn't happen just with funerals, because while I certainly wasn't around a century ago, my hunch is that the 23rd Psalm was not a standard bearer in those early funerals or those funerals long ago. I think it's become that way because it speaks into death, and it speaks into hope, and it speaks into the power of our human condition and need to trust God. So my hunch is that's how it became popular, was just people relied on it because it was so helpful. And then in turn, it just became very popular.
Mm-hmm. It was funny because when I was getting ready for this, I looked online and almost every single website that I was coming to, it was number one, and you know, it is so well known. Do you think Psalms? So Alyssa has left us some questions, and her question is, do you think it was ever considered radical or controversial? And to her, she was saying modern view of God. And I thought that was interesting, because after she said that, I went back and read it again, and I totally see where she's coming from. But do you think these were ever thought of as just out there, radical, conservative, controversial? Yeah. I mean,
you think, I think she's referring to all of the Psalms, not just 23rd Psalm, right? I don't think the Psalms have ever been considered radical, controversial. I think they've always been considered deeply personal and intimate. And I think they've always had an opportunity to help touch people where they are, and to, as we've already discussed over the last several weeks, the Psalms of praise and thanksgiving help us to celebrate God. The Psalms of lament help us to acknowledge the difficulties in life. And the Psalms of trust help us to recognize we actually have something upon which we can trust. And this relationship with God gives us that hopefulness. And I think that too is why Psalm 23 became so popular, was it just speaks right into that. It indicates that there are problems, there are concerns, but I can trust this God who holds me like a shepherd and who guides me like a shepherd.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say it that way, because when the way you've been talking about it is, I look at it as a way to show God that I trust. And I have always thought it from, to be honest, a selfish standpoint of what I get out of it. You know, I get to know that I have peace, and I get. And so it's interesting to look at around and say, hey, God, I'm trusting you, and from those terms of lament. So here's a question. Psalm 23, sounding prosperous. You know, that's a kind of an interesting buzzword or whatever, but it kind of comes from the just trust God and everything's going to be okay. And nothing bad's going to happen to you and you're always going to have this. And how do you see it in terms of that?
Yeah, well, I certainly do not see Psalm 23 as a part of the prosperity gospel. I mean, the prosperity gospel by its nature says, if you believe, all will go well. And not only all will go well, but you'll actually get these benefits. You'll actually receive these positive things, usually money, but often just wealth in general. And that's not what Psalm 23 is saying at all. But what it is saying is, if I trust God, then even though it all hinges on verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's those two words, though and through. It acknowledges that though there are difficult times, I will be taken through them by God's grace. And to me, that's not about what I get on the other side, but rather what I get in relationship with God as I go through, right? The difficult times, whatever they may be. And the difficult times can be anything from difficulty in relationships to facing a job loss to clearly facing death. And that's why it became popular at funerals. But basically, it's just saying, as our good shepherd, God will help us, guide us, protect us, if you will, direct us, encourage us, discipline us, all of the things that a shepherd does, because a sheep needs all that, right? A sheep needs uh, food and drink and safety and security and guidance and discipline. A sheep needs all that. And of course, in this imagery, we are the sheep, God is the shepherd. And all that Psalm 23 is doing is trying to acknowledge that gift that God can offer us through the difficult times. So it's not promising prosperity, it's not promising wealth, it's not promising any kind of specific outcome. All it's promising is that God's going to go with us through the difficult times. That's where the trust comes in, I think.
Yeah. Well, and for those who are, since I'm new, I will share that I'm a 6 on the Enneagram scale. And so for me, this is one, when we learned all about my challenge, I think is the right word, was faith. And I have thought about this a whole lot because it's that how that everything's okay. And I think if I'm hearing you right, that the twist that I'm looking for is not that everything's going to be perfect and not that every be just hunky dory, oh, I have Jesus in my life, so there's never going to be anything bad, but that I will never be alone and that he's there.
That's right. That's the promise of Psalm 23.
And that is peaceful. And
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the valley of the shadow of death. When Alyssa sent me these questions, she made a reference to the Coolio song. And this Gen Xer was really proud of my millennial friend that she even knew that song. But what do you see the valley of the shadow of death? I mean, death is a strong, harsh word there to use.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. And I certainly, Alyssa and I have this relationship where I can tease with her quite a bit. But, Coolio wrote his song, 3,000 years after this psalm was written. So whatever he was identifying, he was borrowing heavily from it, right? And he was able to capture the sense of what that really means. The Hebrew can literally either mean a dark valley, or it can mean the valley of the shadow of death. And all that means is, what does a shepherd do for the sheep but protect them? And if indeed they get down into a dark valley, they need help because they don't know how to get out. And so the imagery is both literal. Hey, a shepherd goes and takes a sheep out of a dark valley to help them, get back up onto the green pasture. Or, as we've taken it in modern day times, it means just the dark times in life, right? And it means either difficulties or actual death. And that's why the valley of the shadow of death references that, golly, God is with us even as we go into the other side, even as we go through death itself. God is with us. And I think that's the beautiful imagery and why it began to be used at funerals, because here we are, we're at death's door. When we're celebrating that life of the person who's died, we are acknowledging that they've crossed from this life into the other and that they've gone through the valley of death. And so it means both for sheep and it means for us as humans. And again, I just find great comfort in that, right? There's a hopefulness in that. Don't you think that's what Coolio meant?
I think in his gangster paradise, that's probably exactly what he's talking about. You know, it's interesting listening to you because it's this fear no evil. Maybe that's my Enneagram 6, but I do fear. I struggle with fear. You know, that's kind of the overarching thing for us. Brain says one thing, my need to think through everything and overthink and plan. I still have that work on my whole life, and you know, but this is a good one to go to when I have that.
Yeah,
entering in.
Yeah, and I just point out that verse 4 is for me critical, right? Even though I'm going to have this difficulty, I'm not going to fear, and I'm not going to fear because I know you are with me. You're going to help me, however. But all of that, of course, comes down to trust. Can I trust that God promises to be with me? Can I trust that it may not work out the way I want, but the way God knows it should? And can I trust that God's going to be with me however it turns out? Whatever the outcome is, can I trust that God is with me? That's the beauty of it. So that's Psalm 23 for you.
Yeah. It's a good cling to, and I am reassured by the knowledge that I don't have to already have it all figured out, that it's a pathway, it's a journey, and that I am on that trust. I just keep plugging forward and growing in that. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for your time today with this. For the I will be back on Wednesday for one more day. This was sort of my maiden voyage, but I'm excited to dig deeper. We've got more questions to kind of get into, and you know, Go Beyond is a great opportunity to get more into the sermon and what wonderful thoughts you have in your head and what God's kind of revealed. So thank you, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Daniel, thanks for being here.
See y'all.
And we will see everybody Wednesday at 12:30.